South Africa is known as the capital of rape and murder, especially for women. However, when you hear such statements, you usually think one case here, one case there, with no association whatsoever. However, on today's episode of The Breakdown, we learn that one man actually took this to a whole new level. A level so inhumane it shocked not just the country, but the entire world. The story begins with a man who decided to spend his day off just hunting rabbits in the bush around the Van Dyke mines. However, during this field trip, he did not expect to be the one to make one of the most haunting discoveries in the city's and the country's history. As he walked along a footpath, he was suddenly overcome by a smell of decomposing flesh. At first, he didn't think much of it. In fact, he thought it was a deceased animal. But as he tried to get away, he saw a body of a woman, bound and gagged, and another one, and another one, and another one. Before he knew it, he was surrounded by 12 decomposing bodies of slaughtered women. This right here was the work of a serial killer. A serial killer so prolific and so elusive that the South African Police Service had to enlist the assistance of the FBI. This was the work of a man known as the ABC murderer, a man responsible for killing and raping as many as 76 women. On today's episode of The Lowdown, the Breakdown series, we'll dive deep and study this monstrous figure, looking at what inspired him to commit such heinous crimes towards women. What had gone so wrong in his life such that he became such a merciless monster? Now welcome to The Lowdown, the Breakdown series. Who is Moses Sithole? Well, let me fill you in. Moses Sithole was born on the 17th of November 1964 in Mpholo, a township on the outskirts of Johannesburg. He was the fourth of 5 children of Simon and Sophie Sithole. His childhood was not an easy one. It was plagued by poverty and violence. You see, Moses was only 5 when his dad passed away, and his mother turned her back on him and the rest of his siblings. Moses Sithole's mother was basically a social reject, an alcoholic who physically abused all her children. She eventually left Moses and his siblings at a local police station, from where they were sent to an orphanage. Moses lived there for 3 years, again at an orphanage, just like when he was living with his parents. Abuse was quite rife, and Moses suffered at the hands of his abusive carers. The only thing that kept him going was his sheer determination to reunite with his mother. He honestly believed that he was taken away from her and did not actually realize that it was his mother that had abandoned him at a police station, whereupon they were actually moved to an orphanage. While at the orphanage home, he tried several times to escape without any success. However, one day he finally broke out and ran as fast as he could. After an exhausting journey on foot, he finally reached his home. He was elated to see his mother and told her that he was back to stay. Instead of being happy to see her son, Sophie was furious and took Moses back to the orphanage. This, for an 11-year-old Moses, was absolutely heartbreaking. When he was 11, Moses was moved to another orphanage, this time in KwaZulu-Natal, which is like 500 kilometers away from Johannesburg. For the first time, he was away from his hometown and again left to the mercy of the wicked officials at the children's home. Life was tough for Moses. Moses eventually ran away from the orphanage in KwaZulu-Natal and eventually made it to Johannesburg, where he ended up living with his older brother, Patrick. You see, while all of this was going on, young Moses always took great interest in the street kids and tried to help them whenever he could, before he turned to the Moses Sithole that we've all come to know and hate. He was working in retail, and this is where he met Doris Sakwamisa in Germiston. He lied to her and said he was a businessman who was recruiting people to work for his organization, a skill he would later fine-tune and use as his go-to method for killing most of his victims. Doris agreed to go to his office for a formal interview, and they met at Germiston train station. Sithole said that he knew a shortcut through the veld, and she walked with him. Once they were completely out of sight, he pulled a knife out of a folded newspaper and explained what was about to happen to her. He tied her hands behind her back using her own underwear, and he sexually assaulted her. When he was done committing the crime, he said to his victim if she promised not to report the assault, he would not kill her. Of course, Doris agreed. He left her in the field, and the bruised and battered Doris managed to get herself home. Despite her promise, she did report the case. Sithole was arrested and taken to custody. While in prison, his sister and mom died, which ignited the already lingering anger inside of him. He was frustrated that he was in prison and felt he was a victim of miscarriage of justice. He blamed Doris for his situation, and his hatred towards women grew even stronger. Now his release came sooner than expected. After serving only 4 years, Moses Sithole was released early for good behavior. Now when does the killing spree actually begin? Well, the country didn't know much about this until the court case had actually begun, and this is where the nuts and bolts of his operation was laid bare. In the beginning, Sithole had asked a typist by the name of Megacy, where he worked as a truck washer, to type and copy application forms for him. At first, he founded the Child Protection Community Organization, but when Melody pointed out that it sounded too much like the Police Protection Unit, he changed the name to Youth Against Human Abuse. He told Melody it was supposed to be a support group, and of course she did not find it suspicious. To lure his victims, he would pose as a businessman who ran an organization devoted to helping abused children, called Youth Against Human Abuse. The main goal of this supposed company was to reunite orphans with their family. Sithole told his victims that he was a married man, and it disarmed them. His victims obviously believed that he was an honest and virtuous well-doer with the best of intentions. He used a series of aliases when contacting his victims and had as many as 6 names he used in rotation. Names like Sylvester, Moses, Joseph, and so on. Moses did not rush into his murders either. No, he wasn't rash like that. Once he met his potential victim, he would mention the possibility of a job. If she was keen, he would schedule an appointment, usually a casual interview over lunch, during which they would discuss the job. He typically told the woman to think about it, and then he would set up a second meeting. He preyed on the desperation of young black women. By the second interview, the women had already trusted this well-dressed businessman, and when he suggested that they take a short walk to his offices, they complied. Now, as soon as they were in an isolated area, he struck without being seen. Besides Doris, he found his first victim in the 18-year-old Marina Monama. He introduced himself as Sylvester and offered a job to her. Then he took her to the field to commit the first of many murders and sexual assaults. When Marina's body was found, a message was scratched into her skin on her leg. It said, "I'm not fighting with you. We will stay here until you understand." According to Sithole, he killed women who reminded him of the ones who had falsely accused him of rape. He showed no remorse and maintained that he killed his victims because he wanted to teach them a lesson. He felt that he had been betrayed by women since childhood. Now it was his time to set the record straight. In court, evidence was presented, including a recorded confession to a fellow inmate. On one video, he openly admitted to 29 murders. He described exactly how he bound, tortured, raped, and killed his victims. He took his time committing the murders, enjoying the thrill of omnipotence. He absolutely loved hearing his victims pleading with him not to kill them. If he had time, he would make the most of it. He took something like a victim's belt or strap of handbag to tie her into a low-hanging branch and watched as she floated in and out of consciousness. Moses Sithole claimed that he chose his victims carefully. His main criterion was that they had to bear a strong resemblance to his first ever victim, Doris Swakamisa, the first woman who had pressed charges against him and successfully sent him to prison. The 16th of December 1995 was a mild spring day in Johannesburg, South Africa. A man decided to spend his day off, basically just hunting rabbits in the field at the Van Dyke mines. However, he did not expect to be the one to make one of the most haunting discoveries in the city's history. As he walked along a footpath, he was suddenly overcome by a smell of decomposing flesh. At first, he thought it was just a deceased animal, but as he tried to get away, he saw the body of a dead woman, bound and gagged, and of course another and another and another. Before he knew it, there were 12 dead bodies lying around the field. In short, the man tried to come to terms with what was before him. he actually realized that he was standing in the middle of one of the most prolific serial killers' dumping grounds. In the 48 hours following the discovery, police found the bodies of 10 women in varying stages of decomposition. All these victims bore the signature of a notorious ABC killer who had been active for just over a year. The news of the killing field made massive waves in media around the country and of course across the border, and the community was appalled. The news was so shocking that even the newly elected President Nelson Mandela cancelled his overseas commitment to visit the scene and pay his respects to the victims. He sent out a personal appeal for information that would help in apprehending the killer who had been terrorizing Gauteng's mothers, wives, and daughters. After months of searching, in August 1995, the South African police finally received the break they so desperately needed. One of Moses Sithole's victims, Amelia Rapodale, was last seen on the 17th of July 1995, living with a man for a job interview. Investigators found an application for a clerical job at an organization called Youth Against Human Abuse. Police could not find any record of such an organization. It was a shell company, which was created to deceive his victims. When they learned about yet another missing woman, police went to the children's home in Israel where she worked. A co-worker told the police that a well-dressed businessman who worked for social services organization had visited the home with a photographer. He told Tryphena, the victim, about his job, and she was very impressed. But when her mother arrived a few days later looking for her, they realized that she had never made it home. Fortunately, Tryphena's co-workers remembered the man's name and were able to tell the police that Tryphena had planned a meeting with a man named Sithole before she disappeared. Although Sithole is a common name in South Africa, the police hit a payday when they found a criminal record of a convicted rapist called Moses Sithole. They showed his mugshot to Tryphena's co-workers, and they confirmed that he was the man who had promised Tryphena a job. When the killer's dumping field was discovered in September, Tryphena's remains were among them. On the 3rd of October, the body of Agnes Mbuli was discovered in Benoni. She was without a doubt the victim of the APC killer. The same day Agnes's body was found, Sithole reached out to a local newspaper, The Star, and spoke to the journalist Tamsin de Beer. He told her that his name was Joseph Makwena and that he was the man that everyone was looking for. Thompson thought it was a hoax at first, but erred on the side of caution and transcribed their conversation. Joseph told her that he had killed women as an act of revenge. He claims that he was falsely accused and wrongfully convicted of rape. The conversations between the journalists took place over a course of 3 days. The man who called himself Joseph revealed information only the murderer would know. He made a startling statement, claiming that the police underestimated how many women he had killed. While the police had found just 38 bodies, the caller reckoned his victim count was closer to 76. Thompson, the journalist, had just had about enough of this sordid conversation. She realized that Joseph did not call her because he wanted to give himself up, but rather because he wanted to know if the police were catching up with him. The journalist said that she did not believe he was the actual killer and asked if he could prove his identity. Sithole revealed the location of an undiscovered victim. In his words, "A lady. I don't think the police know has been discovered." When the police found the skeletal remains, but the man who called himself Joseph was not done yet, he told them about another victim who was killed more recently. Police followed his directions and found a woman's body hanging from a tree in a fell. Both his victims had the same signature as the others. By then, the police knew exactly that Thompson had been talking to South Africa's most prolific serial killer, and he was playing a diabolical cat and mouse game with the police. In the 10 days that followed, police discovered the bodies of 3 women. During one of his phone calls to Thompson, Sithole's money ran out. He gave her a number of the payphone so he could call him back. Before she returned his call, Thompson was smart enough to hand over the information to the police, who rushed to the payphone that was located at a train station. However, Sithole saw the police coming and managed to give them the sleep. With police hot on Sithole's trail, he was desperate for help. He called his brother-in-law, Maxwell, and confessed to him that he was the ABC killer. Although he was shocked, Maxwell agreed to give him a gun and they arranged to meet the next day. at his workplace in Benoni on the 18th of November. The police positioned undercover officers at the factory where Maxwell worked and waited. Sithole showed up on time, as arranged, and when he realized he had walked into a trap, he made a run for it. The police called for him to stop and shot 2 warning shots before chasing after him. The police followed Sithole into a dark alley where Sithole pulled a knife and attacked them. However, the police were able to shoot him in the leg and therefore disarmed him. The police shot Sithole in the leg and subsequently 2 times in the stomach, which eventually ended up disabling him. Moses Sithole was transported to a military hospital under police custody. He received surgery because of the gunshot wounds and survived the operation. On the 4th of December 1997, Moses Sithole was found guilty on all charges. It took the judge 3 hours to read the verdict. The next day, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison for each of the 38 murders and 12 years for each of the 40 cases of rape and 5 years for each of the 6 robberies he had committed. His sentences were to run consecutively instead of being concurrent, which eventually ended up adding up to 2,410 years. Moses Sithole was then sent to a CIMEX security prison in Pretoria, where he settled in for life. When one looks at the character of Moses Sithole, one can actually make a conclusion that this was not just a man, but an animal who had no regard for human life, in particular women. He was clearly a man hurt and broken by the abuse he endured in his childhood and his mother's abandonment. He lacked the mother's love. He lacked the father's guidance. Worst of all, he was constantly abused at various orphanages he lived in. In a conversation with the police, he himself does say that, open quotation, "Hurt has been my daily bread. Hurt has been my prayer. Every minute, every second, every day, every week, every month, every year. A woman can hurt you more than a man, more than anybody in this world." Close quotation. So from there you can definitely tell that this person was definitely hurt. His mother abandoning him absolutely left a scar that could never be healed by any woman. Moses Sithole was clearly motivated by his childhood experience, hence the name of his first organization, Child Protection Community Organization, and his mother's abandonment, hence the hatred towards women. He obviously felt that he had been betrayed by women since his childhood, and this was his time to set the record straight. But all of this does not justify the horrendous acts he committed. No one can ever have any justification for sexually abusing and taking the lives of innocent women. Those were mothers, daughters, sisters, breadwinners who lost their lives for no reason. The story of Moses Sithole is definitely one story that no South African would ever get used to and actually normalize, because every time one comes across it, it just becomes more shocking. 76 victims of rape and murder. Yes, rape and murder. Anyways, you tell me what you think about the guy. Hit me up on the comment sections. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Not because you like the guy, but because you like the content and how it's delivered. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let's keep the conversation going. Hit me up on the comment sections and tell me what you think about this guy, or anything that you feel perhaps could lead to some closure for some of the victims or the victims' families that are still out there. Hit me up on the comment sections. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. It's the lowdown. It's the breakdown series. Catch you on the next one.